First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
Hey, it's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk. Today we are going to discuss the dual roles inside correctional facilities. Dual, D-U-A-L, roles, R-O-L-E-S. I don't know why I'm having trouble saying that. Dual roles. Dual roles. Try it one more time. Dual roles. Okay, so check this out, guys. The reason why I came across this topic, and I think it's important, is I've never set foot inside a federal prison. I haven't. But there was one time about 2 years ago that I went to Clark County, Indiana, checked out the jail, and it was right after they just got done filming the second season of 60 Days In. And I noticed inside that facility, you had correctional officers that also served as nurses. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. I never saw that before. I even asked the officer who was also a nurse, how do you know which role takes priority at which time? And then after I did a video, I had people hitting me up from the federal system saying, hey, Gange, we do that all the time. So I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity for a collab with my man who has the channel As the Key Turns. Now, As the Key Turns is a great channel. It's dedicated to the federal prison system, and it highlights the stories of an experienced correctional officer who lived it. This channel is both informative and entertaining. So what I decided to do was pose the question to him and then get his thoughts about the dual role that's played by correctional officers inside the federal prisons. And again, as he tells us this, he highlights the pros and cons, but through experience and real life examples. Guys, if you haven't, you really got to subscribe to the channel. The channel is called As the Key Turns. So when we get back from our sponsors, I'm going to give the show over to my man, who is the creator of that channel, As the Key Turns. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talk's for you. It's for you brave men and women that work on that front line. So please, guys, subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post up a video. I stand by for our sponsors, and then the show goes to my man who has that channel, As the Key Turns.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Thank you, Anthony, for that great introduction. I really appreciate the chance to be on your channel, Tier Talk, rather than just be on mine, As the Key Turns. It allows us, I think, to speak to a wider audience. And I'd really like to emphasize to my fans, my listeners, that they really should go to Corrections 1 and watch Tier Talk. It's a hard-hitting, tells it like it is channel, and with your experiences from all the way from correctional officer all the way up into the administration, they get a very broad view of how the corrections work and how to advance their careers and move up in the world. I personally was only a correctional officer, was only ever a correctional officer, and only ever wanted to be a correctional officer. So someone who might want to move up in the world might want to pay more attention to some of the things that you have to say. They'll be extremely helpful. And I don't kid when I say, man, I wished I would have seen this guy's channel like 25 years ago. Because when I was first starting out, some of this hard-hitting factual advice that really works, I know, because I've used it, but I just had to learn it the hard way. With watching your channel, they get an opportunity to learn it a lot easier than the way I did. Now, I think that your channel, Tier Talk on Corrections 1 and mine as the Key Turns, are actually trying to do the same things. We're just using a little different philosophy, and maybe that's the way that they do it at the prison where you work. And the prison that I worked at, USP Marion, the way that we did it was we would just have the old guy work with the young guy, and the young guy would listen to the old guy's stories. We used to have this fellow that I used to talk to and tell my stories to, and he'd say, oh, so we're going to play I Remember When? Yep, that's what we're going to do. That's the game today, I Remember When. And then I would tell him a bunch of my stories. And even he said, hey, I'm really glad that I heard those kind of stories, because when a situation that is similar to what you're talking about occurs, I understand how to react better. Sometimes even better than the way I reacted, because I tell them, hey, thinking about it, I should have done blah, blah, blah. So, Anthony, I'm really glad that the techniques that you use to get across your point, and one of which is driving around in a car. And I've never done that before, and as a tribute to our collaboration here, I thought it'd be kind of fun if I drove around in a car and did my thing today. I've never done that before. So, hope I don't sound odd and get into a crash. Well, anyway, what we used to do is just tell these stories. So the subject today is the difference between your prison and mine, the federal and the state. Well, at least in the federal system, we have a background, all of us together. We've all attended the basic corrections school at FLETEC, or Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Brunswick, Georgia. And what that is it's a 3-week course, and it teaches us firearms, the law of firearms, self-defense, unarmed self-defense, and the laws of self-defense, and when we can't shoot prisoners for whatever reason they're attempting to escape. They could be shot, so you can't take a bullet back, so you better make sure that you're doing the correct thing. And not only do they train us in that initially, but every year we get a 1-week course, and in a course, when you get to your institution, we get a 1-week course on the specifics of that institution, and it assists us in knowing generally what's going on. Like, they even teach me how inmates' sentences are computed, so I have a knowledge of that. And then, of course, the lady that does the computation, or the gentleman that does the computation, knows my job. As a matter of fact, they are pulled, not infrequently I might add, to do correctional officer jobs. They have these dual roles. So every plumber, electrician, secretary, even the nurses have this dual role of correctional officer. And the only ones that don't really are the chaplain and the doctor. So what happens is, at any moment, they can be pressed into the role of correctional officer. Now, there's some really great advantages to this. What's happened in the past, and I'll do my storytelling thing, we've had the organized crime decide to break out one of their men. They did this with a gang of armed thugs that attacked our fences with weapons, firing onto the towers. And the idea was to suppress the towers to the point where they wouldn't fire on the escaping inmates. Well, non-custody staff kind of boogered that up for them. The inmates knew that a particular door was going to be open. Well, since all staff are mostly concerned with the safety and security of the institution, and escape being the biggest no-no, along with, one of us getting murdered. This officer, well, I'll call him an officer, he was non-custody staff, immediately, upon hearing gunfire, shut a particular door, because he knew that was a possible route to the escape. And he was right. And because of that, the inmates didn't go to where they had expected to go, and the escape never happened. Now, of course, all the custody staff responded and fired back, and that kind of thing. The armed gang escaped, unfortunately. Nobody knows if they were injured or not. They also set fires in an attempt to distract us, and because we had all these folks that were able to do our job, we were able to send some people to respond to this distraction, this fire, and still maintain a high level of security, which I say directly prevented the escape. Another time, lady went to the local airport, which isn't too far from here, it's over there, hijacked a helicopter, forced the pilot to land in the yard, and then what was supposed to happen was 2 inmates were going to run out, get in the helicopter, and then all 4 of them would fly away to freedom, where they would probably have murdered the poor pilot since he was just a hijack victim. What actually happened was staff detained by force the inmates that were going to escape, and one of which just gave up. It was pretty funny. He just said, "Oh well, guess I'm caught," and he just said, "I'll go back to the cell house," and he just walked back to the cell house because he knew the jig was up. And the pilot and the hijacker had a physical confrontation inside of the helicopter, and he took her weapon away and killed her. He was a old helicopter pilot from Vietnam, so apparently he was a little more than they had bargained on when they decided to hijack him. My point is, these things worked better. I'm not saying that we wouldn't have prevented the escape, but they worked better because all staff were first off and foremost concerned with safety and security, and were trained to maintain safety and security of our institution. Now, the bad part of this, the disadvantage, in my opinion, is that unlike Anthony, where you're working at, we have these dual roles where we could just pull people out, and all of a sudden you're a CO and you're working the cell house, so you're not doing your secretary job, your plumbing job, your electric job, your this job, your that job. You're now doing the role of a CO. And if they told you to do that, they were going to do that prior to your shift. I know that some of these folks have just gone ahead and called in sick, said, "No, I'm not going to actually get to do my job, and it doesn't do my evaluation any good to do this other correctional job, so I'm not even going to bother with it." And they don't show up. Well, what happened is that the folks who do the scheduling decided, well, since they're all going to call in sick all the time, we'll stop telling them. And then the consequence of that is that the secretary comes in her nice new professional looking dress, and she's not going to do that job at her desk anymore. Now she has to put on a utility belt with some keys that leave marks on your clothing, and she's got to have leg irons and handcuffs stuck into this somewhere, like she doesn't have a pocket to put it in, so now she's got to jam it in around this utility thing, and then the oils and greases from the stuff leave marks all over her brand new clothing, and she's responsible to pay for it. So now she doesn't want to dress professionally anymore because she never knows when she's going to work this thing, and she's got to bring in a lunch every day. Otherwise, if she gets pulled, she's going to starve for 8 hours because they don't feed us in the cell houses. We have to bring our own food. So that's one disadvantage, and it drops the morale of the non-custody staff. And add to that the fact that her job isn't getting done. So all this paperwork is piling up, or all the plumbing is piling up, or the electrical work isn't getting done. And eventually the supervisor, usually the warden in the cases where I can really remember this happening, dresses down the plumber or the secretary. "Hey, you are not getting your job done. What's the matter with you?" And they do it in public in front of people like me or the inmates that they work for, because the plumbers and the electricians and the secretaries all have inmate assistants. We use them whenever we can. It's part of the rehabilitation process. Well, now the inmates understand that they have some sort of power, authority over this staff member, because while they're gone, they leave these inmates to do the work. Now, the inmates could just fool around all day, not get the job done, and then their supervisor, the staff member, is going to get a dressing down and a bad evaluation, or they could do a really good bang-up job, in which case the staff member looks good. And if the staff member looks good, he's going to take care of that inmate. So if they, have this little violation or whatever, it just gets ignored. Now, I used to have this warden who thought that prison was kind of like a small town, and she was like the mayor. And if you want to use that analogy, then this plumber, let's say. He's like the guy that owns the plumbing shop in your town, and he has employees, but he's a part-time cop. So if he catches one of his plumbers doing something, some little minor offense, and rather than write him a ticket, he won't, because it'll irritate his employee, and he won't do the job as well, and his business won't be as successful, or his evaluation won't be as good. So he ignores it. And eventually the violations get bigger and bigger, and the crimes get bigger and bigger, until this plumber is now the head drug dealer in the town. And he's protected by this guy because, hey, he didn't turn him in for the last 2 things that he did. And he ain't turning him in for this one either, because now the employee, the inmate, has hooks in him. And the way that works is, a good example, out at the camp administrator has a snitch. And the snitch is snitching out all of his competition drug dealers. This guy's a drug dealer, but he's snitching out the competition at the camp. We have a little satellite camp that provides a lot of inmate work for the inside institution, and it's called the camp. And so there's an administrator, head guy, a bit kind of like a little warden. Well, the administrator is looking pretty good. He's it looks like he's eliminating a lot of drug dealers out there at his camp, when in actuality what he's doing is just giving this one guy a monopoly of the drug trade at the camp. But because the numbers go up, it makes the administrator look good. So he's very lenient on this guy. And after a while, the guy learns that he's bulletproof. He could talk to staff members as disrespectful as he wants. He can pull just about any crime, to include drugs. I personally caught the guy. Caught him. Grabbed his hand. While he had drugs in his hand, took the drugs out of his hand. Turned in a report, turned in the evidence. Figuring, well, he's going to get transferred to a higher security institution, not this, minimum security camp. No, because the administrator has a vested interest in keeping this guy working at the camp. Well, everybody at the camp started complaining about this guy because he treated everybody with contempt and disrespect, knowing that every time he was wrote up, it would be quashed, which was what was happening, because all these incidents have to go through the administrator, and he just wadded them up, threw them in the trash, because this guy was making him look very good. So eventually what happened in this case was I decided that, man, we got to get rid of this fellow somehow. So the warden had an unannounced inspection, and while he was hanging around in a big common area, I went to the living quarters of this inmate, found the contraband that I knew he would have, made sure that not only did he know that I had it, but I made sure that all of his buddies knew that I had it. And then I walked straight to where I knew the warden was located. And, well, this inmate follows me, screaming threats. I'll get you. You won't work here anymore. Something's going to happen to you, buddy, and all that kind of stuff. And not only cussing, I won't use his language here, at me. So we go out there, and this guy just walks right in the room, and he thinks he's bulletproof, and it doesn't matter who anybody is. And he's screaming these threats and profanities and extreme disrespect. And the warden observed this and was a bit displeased and said, hey, this fellow needs to be written up, and we need to look at getting him a transfer. Well, the incident was quashed. Warden followed up on it. And to make a long story short, eventually this quashing had to stop, and the warden said, look, either you're going to transfer or the inmate's going to transfer. So the inmate transferred. And then the administrator decided he didn't want me at his camp anymore. So I was sent back to the main institution. Fine with me, I didn't want to work at the camp anyway. Other incidents happened where, the secretary, the camp counselor, was being pulled all the time, and she needed somebody to help with her work, and she got inmates to assist her in her work, and they made her look pretty good, and they started pulling their crap, and before you know it, she was sneaking in drugs, having sex with the inmates, giving them cell phones, It just got way out of hand before she was caught and arrested, given a couple of years in a penitentiary for that. And that's a point too. I've never seen a staff member go to prison that wasn't a direct result of what the inmates had manipulated them into. So this dual role thing that gives inmates the opportunity to have this authority over the staff is, in my opinion, not worth the benefits. Now, the benefits are good. I mean, they did prevent some escapes and some other incidences. They are able to be relied upon when we are shorthanded. I mean, they don't have to call in a guy from home. Although in a couple of riots that we had, they called in everybody, and all the staff, custody as well as not custody, was able to assist in these riots. And I was damn glad to have the extra help, because the custody staff alone would have been unable to handle these 2 full-scale riots that we had. So yes, the advantages are really good, but I've seen a lot more people hurt, meaning, bad things have happened to them because of this dual role and the ability of the inmates to get some sort of authority over, or able to assist inmate or the staff to the point where it makes them look good, and they feel that they have to reciprocate to the inmate, and that's just unacceptable in my opinion. Now, Anthony, on Tier Talk, you mentioned that they don't do this sort of dual role thing. So I'm kind of curious as to how the emergencies work where you're at. I mean, what happens during these full-scale riots? Is it only the custody that's involved, or and when there's shortages of the custody staff, they don't pull the plumber and make him work in a cell house? Is that how it works, if I'm understanding you correctly? I'd be very curious as to how you handle it at your prison. And here I am in the car. I hope this sounded pretty good. I've never done this before. I just did it because you did it, Anthony. I thought it looked pretty good, actually. And I'd like to thank you again for allowing me to come off my channel As the Key Turns, and be on your channel, Tier Talk, and Corrections 1. It was, I hope this is beneficial to both As the Key Turns and to Corrections 1 Tier Talk. So, thanks again, and thanks for what you do. You make prison a lot less mysterious to the general public, and you've even assisted me and my relatives. I've showed them some of your videos and said, see, this is what I was talking about. And you're kind of a confirmation for some of the things that I'm saying. You just say it in a different manner, and I appreciate that. And anybody that watches my stuff that does anything in law enforcement or is curious about what happens in law enforcement should watch your channel too. Because I personally, even now that I'm retired, get a great deal out of it. I enjoy it. You're very entertaining. Thank you for what you do.